Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Hero Movie Podcast, your greatest source for superhero movie discussion in the multiverse. I am your host, Adam Portrais, and I'm joined today by Sweet Shawnsy from the internet.
Thanks, Punk Portrais.
And, of course, Bruce Leslie.
I'm a prickly pear, but you guys can call me Hoot Nanny.
Why would we call each other these things? You can only find out by being a supporter over at patreon.com/HMP. Spilling the beans all over the place. Sorry, we'll clean those up later. But before we get to that, though, I do want to say, speaking of Patreon, we do have a brand new member to the Patreon team coming in at the $5 a month, Joe B. Joe B, thank you for being amongst the most beautiful people in the world, the people that support this show over at patreon.com/HMP. There you get the pre-show, post-show, and, of course, the Dinger Zone, where we talk all about childhood nicknames, trips, and all kinds of really stupid stuff that you can only find there. Just, it's embarrassing. Just go listen to it. It's a fun time. But let's give Joe his nickname here. Bruce, you've headed to the lab for this one. What have you cooked up for us this week?
Well, Joe B's in luck because I was recently driving through southern Ohio, and just out of nowhere, for some reason, I got the idea that a great nickname would be Cincinnati Slingshot. So with Sean's approval, maybe we can give Joe B the nickname Cincinnati Slingshot.
Let's go to the committee.
Oh, we're all thumbs up over here, boys.
So, Joe B, from this point, Bruce, you give the announcement. Do you remember how to do it? Sean's been doing it. Don't.
Well, yeah. It's by the internet's powers invested in the great Sweet Shawnsy. By proxy, I proclaim you Cincinnati Slingshot.
Cincinnati
Flawless
Slingshot.
And beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely awesome. So if you'd like to be like the good old Cincinnati Slingshot, get yourself an HMP nickname and all the good things that go along with it, head on over to patreon.com/HMP today and join the family. We'd really appreciate that, and we really appreciate all of you. This week, we're going to be talking about Polar. It is a movie that is on Netflix right now. Let's go ahead and take a listen to the trailer.
I like it here. It makes me peaceful.
Me too.
You're not from around here, are you?
No, I'm retired.
What was your job?
I was in the funeral business.
Huh.
As you know, we manage the investments of our employees. If a former agent dies after retirement, their $8 million goes back to the company.
This is a bad idea.
Bang. Where the hell is he? Somebody set me up over here. You better pray you have nothing to do with it.
You tried to kill the Black Kaiser and kidnap his cute little neighbor. We should pay him so we don't have to look over our shoulder for the rest of our lives. You'll need all of it.
Try not to be scared. You make mistakes when you're afraid.
Thought you stopped smoking.
Figured it wouldn't kill me.
Why are you doing this?
I like her.
You're not a good man, but you're doing a good thing.
Did you happen to see anything peculiar the past couple days?
No.
All right, that was the trailer for Polar. It's almost kind of a new release. It's from 2019. It's on Netflix right now. But before we get into the full details of this, let's do this.
It's time for Bruce's Comic Book Connection.
Bruce, if this thing didn't tell me that it was a comic book related thing, I wouldn't know. Please enlighten us.
Well, Polar is based on what was initially a webcomic. And though this probably isn't the first webcomic adaptation we've ever covered, it feels like it's the first in a good while. And the comic is by writer and artist Victor Santos. And something sort of special about the original incarnation of the comic was that it was largely silent, meaning the pictures told the story without dialogue bubbles or boxes. Also, I think the original stories were done with only black, white, and orange used for colors. And that makes it feel a little like the Sin City story, The Yellow Bastard, in a way. But the comics were collected and eventually published by Dark Horse Comics, who did add speech bubbles to give the stories a more traditional feel and try to reach the widest market possible, because that's the kind of thing that publishers need to do. But the Polar comic is actually a follow-up to an original graphic novel that Santos did that was called The Black Kaiser, with, of course, the Black Kaiser being the main character. But Polar's the story about how that retired hitman was forced out of retirement. And the story's been described as bleak. It features a femme fatale character with a large amount of gore, and it's set in an icy landscape. And Victor Santos stated that his Black Kaiser character was actually inspired by Jim Steranko's Shield comics. And that becomes kind of obvious, I think, when you see the eye patch go on there. And Santos has also described the creation of this story as mixing classic Marvel books, the Bourne movies, and manga action. He didn't find a publisher that was interested in a sequel to Black Kaiser originally, so that's when he decided the web was the way to go. And he felt like the format allowed him to follow readers' responses for each update and to correct mistakes more rapidly. And he also stated that he loved the widescreen layout that was possible on web pages. As a personal project, Polar allowed Santos to develop storytelling experiments without limitations, and Santos decided to use a minimal style for the webcomic, particularly the limited colors, so that each page wouldn't take more than a few hours to complete. He also described Polar as a tribute to artists like the aforementioned Jim Steranko, as well as Jose Antonio Munoz, Alberto Breccia, Alex Toth, and Frank Miller. And as for the lack of dialogue, he's also been reported that he kind of decided to exclude it because he speaks Spanish and he didn't really want to waste time translating from Spanish to English for the webcomic. But if you're in for a different taste of Santos art, you can absolutely get that, because he took over the art duties starting with Volume 2 of The Mice Templar, which is kind of like the Knights Templar, but with mice.
Oh, really?
And the way things are going, it's probably only a matter of time until Netflix produces that. And, of course, I'll be watching.
Well, Netflix does pump a lot of money to a lot of things. Let's find out if this one is worth its while. Here's the IMDb plot line. IMDb always 100% correct in everything they say and or do. A retiring assassin suddenly finds himself on the receiving end of a hit contracted by none other than his own employer, seeking to cash in on the pensions of aging employees. This is starring Mads Mikkelsen, Vanessa Hudgens, Catherine Winwick, Faye Wren, and more. Directed by Jonas Åkerlund. And the only thing that people may recognize that he's done, he did like tons and tons of music videos, but he did Lords of Chaos, which I didn't see, but I heard a lot of people enjoyed quite a bit who are into that kind of scene.
And he's Scandinavian, like Mikkelsen, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, I thought I saw that he was Swedish, but I could have gotten that wrong.
Denmark, Danish.
Okay, that was close.
Close enough. You're in the vicinity. You throw a rock, you'll hit one of these folks for sure. I had zero idea about what this movie was ahead of time. Bruce last week said, hey, this is a comic book thing. We're like, okay, it's on Netflix. It's easily available. All I knew was the name was Polar. Mads Mikkelsen was in it, and he was wearing an eye patch looking like Metal Gear Solid. And before you Metal Gear Solid people start emailing me, it's Big Boss or whatever, just shut up. You know what I'm talking about. But that's all I knew going into this. And, man, I wish I would have known more.
Oh, really? Really?
Okay, so let's start here. Bruce, what did you think of Polar?
Well, first off, last week when I recommended it, I just didn't want anything at all like The Saint. And this is definitely not like The Saint. Stuff happens here.
Okay.
And I think that what a lot of people have said about it, after I watched it, I kind of read some commentary out there, and they agreed with what my moments when I was watching this, I thought, this has a little bit of a John Wick feel to it, with the guy kind of coming out of retirement and having to kill everybody. And then I also thought, it's also got a little bit of Leon the Professional with that whole relationship that we'll find out near the end with the twist that's revealed with the young girl that he spares when he assassinates her family. And, I was glad that a lot of other people had seen that same kind of similarity there. And, I'm not saying that this is anything great, but it absolutely didn't feel like a waste of time watching it. I was way more into the first hour of this than I was into the first hour of The Saint.
And now we go to Sweet Shanzi. What early thoughts on Polar? Let's get them out of the way.
Well, this is the second time I've seen this movie because
really?
I saw it. I think when it first came out to Netflix last year.
Mm-hmm.
This movie is, the best way I can describe it is, if you are a 14-year-old boy, this is the greatest movie that has ever been made.
That was precisely my thought. If you're between like 12 and 14, 16 years old, you are going to love this movie.
I think that's a good one. I wouldn't disagree with that.
And it's not a bad movie. It's not a great movie. It's a movie. Sometimes I can't speak for our female listeners, but as a nerdy boy, I can tell you that sometimes on a Saturday afternoon, all I want to see is a 14-year-old boy movie. And this is the thing. This is that 14-year-old boy movie that, like, oh, hey, like I know nothing about this movie. It looks like it could be terrible or it could be great. Let's check it out. And so I checked it out. The first time I checked it out, I was like, this movie is better than it has any right to be. However, on second viewing, I can tell you that having Mads Mikkelsen in your movie, you immediately heighten everything around it, because he is a very, very good actor. And so when Johnny Knoxville shows up and he's a terrible actor, or what I can only assume is a very drunk Richard Dreyfuss.
That floored me.
I don't think that's acting. I think he's actually drunk in that.
And no makeup or anything. They just let him on because it was like, oh my goodness, so sad.
They probably were high-fiving each other that he agreed to do it.
Yeah.
But I mean, he is barely in this movie, even when he's in this movie. But you don't need any of that because Mads Mikkelsen is so good. I don't know how to think about the rest of the movie. Like, I think that it's fun. Like, they have a lot of fun bits to it. But when on second viewing, it's not something where you're like, at least me, it's not something where when I watch it, I go, yeah, I was right the first time. It's more like, oh, this doesn't hold up as well.
Yeah, this movie felt a lot to me like it was about, let's say, 15 years too late. I feel like this movie is, and how this movie is made is almost practically out of vogue now, because there's very much the feeling from the Crash guys and all of that, because this feels, or Crank rather, Crank. The Crank films, Neville Dean and Taylor.
I was wondering where you're going with Crash.
Crank. Sorry, but the Crank movies, it feels like that, but like the Crank movies are almost like cranked so to 11 that like the joke kind of comes back in on itself in a weird way. With this,
basically the Crank movies are better than Crash. Please continue.
Yes. far better. But with this, it felt like they were trying to do that Neville Dean and Taylor thing, plus add like your Leon elements. There's like an old boy element in a weird way. It's 2 hours long. Frankly, it's boring to me. I was like, there's a couple of great moments in this movie, and we'll talk about those. But overall, I found it just dull and boring and slow. it's almost like there's really two different movies here. There's Mads Mikkelsen's movie over here, and then there's the Henchman movie over here, and they almost sort of meet for like half a second, but I think you could take all of the villain stuff, which I think is the garbage stuff in this movie, take all of that out, reshoot all of that, and give us something that's worth a crap, because all of that is just, it seems so late 90s, early 2000s, villainy kind of over-the-topness, and with the one guy who was in Doctor Who, he sucks. Just bad.
Also, 15 years too late. 15 years is almost enough time that you can start going back around to something too, though.
Maybe, but like those movies, while they made enough money, they never really got to that, crazy popular level where everybody was kind of trying to do that, I guess.
So when you say you were bored, were you more bored than The Saint?
Because The Saint was stupid, but like at least, and I'll grant you, there are some better action scenes in here. There are a couple. The hallway fight, more or less, we'll call it, is fantastic. There's a couple, a bit of gunplay, but I'll be honest, like a lot of this movie kind of felt like just skeevy and gross to me, to be honest.
I gotta say, there is something about this movie where when you're watching the Mads Mikkelsen character just be a sad old man walking around the remote small town, there is something really great about that part of the movie. I could watch that movie all day long. But when it comes to the over-the-top stuff, the not even one-dimensional characters of the henchman and the fat guy from Little Britain, and that part of the movie, that holds no sway for me the second time I watch it. But the first time I watched it, it was interesting because at least you're like, for me anyway, I was like, oh wow, didn't see him doing that, didn't see that coming, that sort of thing,
Well, I've only seen it once, so I can't comment on rewatching, but I'm just really surprised, Adam, to hear you call it boring, because even when it was slow, I wasn't bored. Like the levels of boredom I experienced in The Saint, that's why I held this movie to an incredibly low bar. And it surpassed that incredibly low bar that was set the week before by The Saint. But in my head, I kind of thought like a little test to tell if you should be watching a movie or not. Is like when I was watching The Saint, I actually thought, this movie is so bad that I actually would find it more interesting if it had Andy Dick and Pauly Shore in it. Because then, even though it's still going to be a horrible movie, then I'm going to be a little curious. But this movie this week would have definitely not held my interest as much with those two. So that's a real low bar. If they make the movie better, I shouldn't be watching it. If they make it worse, I'll keep watching.
And I guess that's part of my, just gripe is that, when watching this, it did just feel very derivative of things that I'd seen, time and time and time again. It doesn't really give us a whole lot of new stuff to kind of chew on here. If you really kind of break all the basic elements of this story down, it's fairly cliche.
Yeah, but sure, of course it's cliche. It's for 14-year-old boys. But when it comes to the smaller stuff, like him being clever, there's a lot of great tough guy lines in this movie. That part's cool. It's once the movie you're going to see, at least for me, when it comes to something like this, I at least want to see them be good at the thing that they're making. And that's, to me, what this movie is that they know what this is. The people who made this movie know what this movie is. And so they do a good job of making a dumb movie, and it is a good dumb movie.
Plus, they introduce what's supposed to be the cute little puppy dog sidekick, and they make the good decision of getting rid of that quick.
Yeah.
That's it. Hold on. Let's stop for a second, because Bruce thought he was going to get away with it, but we're paying attention, Bruce. We know. We know you don't like dogs. We get it. So that let's put that aside for a second. Let's pretend Bruce didn't say that. Let's pretend Adam said that. So, Adam, with you saying that,
yes,
I think it was very surprising that he bought a dog and then the dog is dead. But this movie was made after John Wick, right?
Yeah.
So they have to know going into it that, oh, we can't give this guy a dog, because if he has a dog, then it's just basically John Wick again.
Listen, I'm at least glad that like he didn't, it wasn't like absolute fall in love, and then. But I'm at least gracious that they kept the killing off screen. That was at least nice. So thanks for that, guys.
They actually did pitch this to get distribution and funding. They pitched it as John Wick with Mads Mikkelsen. So I mean, it's like not any question that they are aiming for that.
Right, but I mean, you know what I'm saying. That
I know what you're saying, and I thought that was kind of a clever decision there. Like, he kills his own dog.
Yeah,
this movie instead of somebody else, and then when he's out burying the dog, he sees Camille, this character that will play a big part in this movie. He sees Camille outside trying to chop wood. Now, I don't know how long she's lived in that particular house or how long she's lived in this town. But not only did she look like she'd never chopped wood before, she looked like she'd never seen an axe before. That was pretty ridiculous, her failing. Like, did I see it wrong, or was she trying to hit the wood with like the flat side of the axe instead of the pointy end?
The blunt side's the tough one, isn't it? That means it's the heaviest. That means it's going to go down the fastest, and that'll break it up. Listen, I don't know how these things work.
It was like infomercial, incompetent dad level from an infomercial. Her out there trying to chop that wood, though. It was pretty. They sold it a little too much that she needed help chopping wood.
How do I drain this spaghetti? I'll pour it in the floor.
Oh, I spilled soda. Now I got to buy a new house.
Yeah, like washing golf balls. What is this? Why are we doing any of these things?
Yeah, he goes over, chops the wood for her because he's burying his dog when he sees that happen.
Well, that's how you got to get him off the scent of the dead dog. It's just is that birch? I certainly don't smell dead dog around here. Good job.
And I also know at one point I was watching and I was like, man, this is like an old John Wick. And then I slowed down for a minute and I said, I'm pretty certain Mads Mikkelsen is younger than Keanu Reeves. And I was very glad when I looked it up that he is indeed younger than Keanu Reeves, but he's still an old John Wick.
Well, he's got one of those faces. He's got Keanu Reeves for all he's been around is still a pretty man, Yeah.
I think our go-to reference that Sweet Shanzi's provided us for is like the person who was born looking 55 is like Morgan Freeman. He's got one of those born looking old faces. You go back and see Morgan Freeman in 1974 in The Electric Company. He already looks old.
That old man's haggard. It's like he's 26.
Yeah. Same way with Mads Mikkelsen. And I didn't realize that I liked Mads Mikkelsen so much until I watched this because, other than Caecilius, I don't know that I'm familiar with him from a whole lot, but I really, really like his performance in this movie.
Well, hold on a second, because not everybody's going to get their reference. That's the bad guy in Doctor Strange.
Yes, Caecilius was the bad guy in Doctor Strange.
But he's also he's in Rogue One.
Yeah.
He's Hannibal. He's done a lot of high.
Hannibal's where a lot of I think most people would probably know him because that was network television.
I didn't like him as Hannibal. But a lot of that's because I already knew that character Hannibal so well from Anthony Hopkins, and it's a very different version of Hannibal. But I wasn't particularly impressed with him as Hannibal, but I love him as the Black Kaiser.
No, it was good. I think really the big one that surprised me as far as acting, because I've seen Mads do, great acting, so that's not ultimately a surprise. But Vanessa Hudgens was actually really good.
She is good in it.
I was shocked, and they kind of uglied her up a little bit, or at least planed her up, if you will, because she's a beautiful young lady.
From like a month or so ago, she was my choice to play Dr. Aphra, so I'm glad to see the acting chops on display here.
Yeah, she was great in like Spring Breakers, and she's in a couple other flicks, most of which are not super great. So it's good to see her kind of get a better role. Oh, she's in the new Bad Boys for Life as well. So there you go.
She's in your favorite movie, Journey to the Mysterious Island.
Listen, man, I've seen that, and
I know that you do not like that movie.
Ew. No,
got her big break in the High School Musical and went places. Her and Zac Efron both, have had pretty good careers post Disney.
Yeah, listen, it's almost as if they breed them over there to to be stars.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing. But yeah, I to me this whole thing, it just seemed like It was overly long. I don't know why I would like Mads Mikkelsen's character. I like the overall conceit, the idea that like once these guys get to a particular age, they need to retire out of the system, and they retire out with a whole bunch of money. Because I had an idea about the lottery, people that would win the lottery, and like the government would send an assassin team out to get them, and they would have to fight the people off in order to keep their money. This is kind of like that, but with assassins.
A big glaring plot hole, though, in that driving part of the story, if we want to look at this a little more critically, when you hire assassins to take out retired assassins because you don't want to pay them their retirement, don't those assassins you've hired know that someday it's going to be them? It's like the Looper phenomenon here.
Yeah, he should have probably himself had to have taken out a couple of cats at this point, unless all they have to do is drop one line that just goes, a new development in our thoughts. And
they had that meeting where he's trying to sell the Damocles Corporation, so he wants to decrease their financial liability.
Yeah.
So they have that whole idea about they have to match his retirement, but even just refuse to match it. You don't have to kill the guy.
Listen, I drive hard bargains, not just regular bargains.
But that
hard
was
bargains.
my big problem with the logic of that is what are these assassins that you're hiring now? But then again, I also know how young people new to a job think they know everything better than the guy who's been doing it for 30 years. And they're convinced that they'll be better when it's their turn to retire, that it won't be like that. I can kind of see that too.
Yeah, nobody can touch me.
I'm different.
Now, what did you guys think about like the kind of there are a lot of maybe assassination attempts. I don't know if that's the right word to use but there's a lot of like people outside looking through scopes and about to storm the castle and all that kind of jazz. Did we do that too many times? It felt like it was at least 2 or 3 times, right?
Oh man, in a world where people play PUBG and Fortnite and stuff, you can't get too many scope shots these days.
But in so much of it, it just felt like they didn't have their routines and everything planned out nearly as well as they should have for this, elite team that is sent out to get this other elite guy. I don't know.
And I think that's a little bit of the commentary about the young brash guys that think they know everything versus the old guy who, if you get old doing this, you got old because you're good at it.
Okay, Now let's talk about him being good at it. So when he's driving down the road and sees this chick broke down on the side of the road with her big giant hat and everything that just screams, this is no good, why does he pick her up, bring her to the thing, and then proceed to do the horizontal mambo? Like, none of these things are, like, he's an idiot.
Maybe he's just got a very hungry libido.
I mean, sure, but
he figured out a way how he could do the stuff and use that to lure his assassins, to flush them out. Like this way, he knows, okay, I bring her home. That's when they're going to make the move, and I'm ready for it. Instead of worrying if it's going to happen while I'm asleep.
I would love to think that was the case. This did not tell that to me via narrative. I'll tell you that much.
And I also like Catherine Winnick's character, who from the beginning is telling Mr. Bluth there, hey, just pay this guy what you owe him and forget about it because this is going to backfire on you. I liked her character there, too. I like Catherine Winnick a lot, though.
Is your favorite role of hers from 50 First Dates?
No, it's from Vikings. But
yeah, I figured
pretty much all I know her from.
I figured as much.
Yeah. She was in the Dark Tower, too.
Boy, I tried to forget as much as that as I possibly could.
A lousy movie.
What a stinker.
The best description I've seen of the Dark Tower was Matthew McConaughey and Idris Elba deciding together, let's phone this one in. Let's have a contest to see who can be less enthusiastic about the project. But yeah, back to this movie. Here's what I think. I do agree with you that it was a little too long, and I really liked the first hour. But I think this movie could have ended at about an hour and 15 because at the first hour, I thought it was almost over, and I checked and there was a whole nother hour left. But it really lost me for a little bit when we get to the extended torture sequence, 4 days of torture. I've never been one that really enjoys a movie that that was my biggest complaint about The Punisher was the prolonged torture scene. And this has that same problem with me, which is like, I see the gruesome torture on the first day. I don't really need to see it for 3 days.
Yeah, it's over the top. It's egregious, but it's almost even worse because it's shot so poorly. This whole torture scene is shot just so generic and bland, and maybe this is what he was going for, of like, oh, I'm just going to show the staleness of this and how he's just, but it doesn't, the rest of the movie, none of that's congruent with anything else that's on the screen. So that reading doesn't make a lot of sense. It just felt like really boring, lazy directing, where it was just like, hey, we threw some wicked graphics and stuff on the screen and then just kind of had him laugh, maniacally as he, punches holes in the guy's body. That's boring.
And that's, like I said, that's what lost me. First off, I'd like to see this guy being good enough that he never gets caught and tortured. I mean, of course, he maybe suffers along the way. He needs to have some great suffering and overcome some serious odds. But once you've got him in chains, you think anybody who understands how deadly this guy is, like the first thing you do is you cut his hands off, or you know what I mean?
At least break all the fingers or something so he can't get a hold of guns or weapons or anything of that nature. My goodness.
Or you blind him right off. You blind him right off the bat so that, just in case he does get up to something and try to escape, he's harmless. Like, I would think you just would disable him on the first chance you got. Even if you didn't want to kill him quickly, you'd still disable him right away.
Matt Lucas's character. Let's talk about it. It's just terrible.
Who's Matt Lucas?
It's the bald guy.
He's the fat guy from Little Britain.
Okay, is that Mr. Blute, the one that wears the wig?
Mm-hmm.
The stork bite on his face.
Correct.
Okay, what about him, man? I thought he was fine.
Fun. It's so bad. I mean, it's cliche. It's terrible. It's not, like I said. If you're 14 years old, this is fine. But I think anybody with a high school education just goes, this is terrible. It's so boring and generic. I wish it was something that had some flavor to it. And I'll be honest with you guys, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, I kind of wish I would have watched the trailer for this. Maybe I'll admit that may have, not knowing what any of this is going in before watching it, aside for the name and the star of the film, maybe I would have had a different reaction to this, but not good for me.
The name was a little confusing to me too, but more to say about Matt Lucas before I derail us.
No.
But, I just picture he probably inherited the Damocles Corporation from his father when his father died 18 months ago. And that's why this guy's an idiot. Yeah, I figured he's not who built this company from the ground up. But once again, that requires me to make up my own backstory to make it palatable.
Which we shouldn't have to do.
But the name also confused me. Like with the name Polar, I really expected something to end up going down in the Arctic Circle or in the Antarctic. You know what I mean? I don't understand why Polar.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my main questions for you guys at the end of this is why the name Polar? I do not follow.
You have any insight, Sean?
I don't know why they call it that.
Jeez Louise. What a great sign for a movie that you finished the whole darn thing in 4 separate viewings, if we're counting Sean's 2, which I believe that we do. And we still don't know why it's named the thing that it's named. I mean, I guess you could say that about anything, but
John Wick. I know why it's named John Wick.
Yeah. You got a clue.
Same reason Superman's called Superman and Super Lopez is called Super Lopez.
Why Hero Movie Podcast is called Hero Movie Podcast. It's what we do. Read it in the name. I don't know if you know anything about me, but I like to have shows where people know exactly what we are right away.
They should have called it Duncan and his retirement and how they tried to screw him out of his retirement so he had to get even. That would have been a great title.
Fiona Apple does the soundtrack. I might have watched that movie. I might have watched that one.
But it lost me for a little bit with that extended torture scene. But then I'm enjoying his, giving Mr. Blute his comeuppance at the end. But I do want to go back to the very beginning, though. When I saw Johnny Knoxville, first off, I didn't think it was really Johnny Knoxville. I thought this must just be a guy. Then it became terribly obvious. Nope, this is Johnny Knoxville. And I was like, how did I not know? Me knowing Johnny Knoxville was in the movie, I don't know if that would have hurt me or helped me going into it. But it's certainly jarring when the first thing you see on screen in what you think is a Mads Mikkelsen movie is Johnny Knoxville. I imagine that Venn diagram has only crossed over once.
Well, I am at least glad that he only had as much screen time as he did, because I was fearing oh no, is Johnny Knoxville in this thing for a long period of time, because we are in for something.
Oh, I was worried he was going to be like the one that gets away in the beginning and they send Mads Mikkelsen after him. Like, I thought this was going to be a cat and mouse game with Mr. Knoxville and Mads Mikkelsen.
Oh, so bad. But then again, it doesn't feel like they gave him much of a script. They were just like, you just do what you want there, Johnny. Have fun.
Plus, like, the whole time I'm seeing him in the sexy time with Cindy there, all I can think about was, like, in real life, he has to use a catheter to go to the bathroom and stuff. The guy's messed up his junk from too much jackass.
Let that be a lesson to you, kids. Be very, very
upper
careful.
Body-themed stunts. A bad shoulder, a bad rotator cuff is one thing, but when you have to straight cath yourself to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, it's a little too much. What else can we talk about with this thing? Because to me, and again, that's why I was just like, I don't know what we're going to talk about with this movie, because nothing really happens for 2 full hours. He kills some people. That hallway scene is fantastic. I love the violence level. I love the gunplay stuff. Hiding behind people and kind of using them as human shields, and just the massive amount of destruction that was in that. It's just like, they're like fun scenes and stuff like that are highlighted throughout, but like the connective tissue for me just didn't do it.
Yeah, and this I don't know what you want to call it, the rookie team, the new team, like his go-to team since the older Mads Mikkelsen is retiring. This squad of 4 don't really seem all that impressive to me. Or if anything, there's like maybe 2 of them that seem to make sense, but then there's a couple there that are just like dead weight. Like, you could contract out that part of the job. Once you get to the site, they don't have to travel with you. Like, I don't think you necessarily need to take Cindy with you from location to location. And then they add Junkie Jane at the end, who seems like an interesting character, but it's like she's Poochie. Like, all of a sudden she's part of the team. Like, there's no Junkie Jane for the first few bits of their caper. Then suddenly Junkie Jane shows up and she's part of the team, but she's also the one who's a junkie.
Yeah, that's a ridiculous bit. I also, when they're going in and they're like, just the torturing of the fat guy scene and everything, it's just like, what are we doing here, man? I don't know. Like, I just, like, this movie just felt gross.
Yeah, there were some gross moments.
But there was that was gross. Like, all the sex stuff, none of it is sexy. It's all gross sex kind of stuff. It's just like, I don't know. I just felt dirty watching it.
I will tell you, the chowder buckets seemed extremely gratuitous, because I'm like Sean says, a movie that the key demographic that's going to enjoy this movie, you don't need to be throwing that much of the chowder buckets at them.
No, and that was the thing of, like, if you look back at a lot of those 80s movies that, many people think that there's tons of nudity and stuff in, there's like, a little bit here, a little bit there, but, Corman himself said it's just like, hey, there's a couple of few spots that you got to do, and the kids think that they've seen a lot more than they actually have.
Yeah, but also those 80s movies would have a point where, like, the lady's shirt would just fly off for no reason that made any sense, just to squeeze in the chowder buckets.
Well, strong winds are strong winds, Bruce. I don't know what you know about meteorological events, but these things happen.
I'll step on the escalator. Oops, where did my dress go?
Oh, no. It's all very, what was his name? Benny Hill.
The wind resistance here is terrible.
The button industry really has gone downhill the last couple of decades. We've been talking about it, real quietly, but I think it's time we start letting people know that buttons just aren't doing it these days.
A great counterpoint to this is I can watch John Wick with the kids, that like the action stuff, my older kids. But I couldn't watch this. I don't even want to watch this with anybody.
No, this is, and Sean talks about this a lot, of like, if people came into the room when you're watching this movie, I'm embarrassed anybody watches me watch this movie. It's of that level.
Most of this movie wouldn't bother me, but the chowder bucket scenes, like if my wife walked in when I'm watching certain scenes in this movie, she would not believe I was watching it for the podcast.
She's over there just going, "Hey, honey, look at Mad's ass. Look at it. Look at that."
And
there.
Suggested it.
Yeah.
So there is a character in this movie that I think that if you were going to make another movie based on this property here, you could do it, and you could even make it interesting. And I think that character is the the lady that he goes and sees to recover. You know, after he gets tortured, he goes Jasmine. Because Jasmine has all the cool toys. And so the story would be Jasmine. The next one, it wouldn't be Black Kaiser. It wouldn't be Camille. It's none of those characters. It's her.
Yeah.
You know, I think Jasmine is the cool character that you've literally seen 3 minutes of. The problem is that no one would know that this is a sequel to this movie.
I hey, we could just call it Polar too. I mean, Polar doesn't mean anything clearly.
Polar Jasmine. I didn't even think about that. What you suggest there, Sean, I hadn't thought about that, but that sounds pretty good. I know the direction that the comics go with the sequels kind of hinted at the end of this, but you know, when I guess we talk about the twist that Camille was this little girl who he felt bad because he killed her parents.
Right.
And he's been sending her $200,000 a year every year, and she knows who he is, and he gives her the chance to kill him, and she doesn't do it. But then, like, the sequel comic is Camille and Black Kaiser are now a team, and they're out to get revenge against the people who hired Mads Mikkelsen to kill her parents. Right. That's how he pays her back, like the blood debt.
Listen, that idea sounds at least a little bit more entertaining than what we've got here, I think. I mean, I like the overall story of it and where things kind of go. I just feel like the execution is quite poor.
You know what this really feels like, this movie? It feels like one of those movies that came out after Pulp Fiction came out in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
That's really what this feels like. Like, oh, that's what people want, so we'll make that. And they kind of don't get it. And so they make their version of what they think that is.
And I also think they could have streamlined this story for the purposes of a movie. Now, a web comic that comes out, you know, whenever it comes out, do what you want there. But a movie's just a totally different medium. And I think streamlining the story, like part of what I love so much about that first John Wick is there's hints of this whole underground society that he's from, but it's basically just a guy going through town trying to get somebody and kill him, you know? And this could have been pretty good if he's retiring, that he finds out they're trying to kill him. So the whole movie is just him dodging the assassins they send after him till he kills them all and gets back and kills the main guy. I mean, if you're pitching it as John Wick with Mads Mikkelsen, then give us John Wick with Mads Mikkelsen. Maybe you don't need to include the complicated twist with Camille there. You know, I feel like they're trying to make this a different movie there than what they're giving us through the bulk of it.
Well, it's like when you talk about like the comparison between John Wick and everything, the big thing is that John Wick goes through, it's got its little tiny story, and honestly, the majority of that movie is just fantastic action. Here they're trying to weave in a story, and the story just isn't really there. It doesn't really do much. When they get to the action stuff, that stuff works, but it feels like they're trying to be almost too heady in a movie that doesn't kind of deserve that, or at least the
I think
one
you're
half
saying
of
the
it
same
doesn't.
thing I'm saying, Adam. Yeah, I think they tried to make it too add a little too much depth with the Camille storyline.
Well, you guys will be very glad to hear this, but the guy who wrote the screenplay for this, Jason Rothwell, he also on deck has written screenplay for the new League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Oh,
so,
goody.
Yeah.
I'll be watching it whether I want to or not.
Yeah, that's going to be exciting.
But it just it feels like a lesser version, but like when you're watching John Wick and you have all that stuff that's in the background with the whole, you know, the Assassin's Guild and all that kind of garbage and stuff, that's nice little, you know, garnish to the meal that is John Wick. But that's not the thing. You ultimately don't super care about all that stuff. What you're doing is using that as a platform to the next great, amazing action scene. And this is just like, we've got a couple of action scenes that will splice into this fairly boring story.
And that's also why I like the first John Wick better than the sequels, too, as the sequels start diving I won't say too much. They just dive more into that mythos, where the first one, I liked it because it was just a very straightforward story.
Yeah, especially with the third one, because they come up across their own rules and stuff, and they they barely even know what they're talking about anymore, it seems.
My problem with John Wick is that there's assassins who are homeless. Like if they're assassins, wouldn't they have money?
They're
Like,
just
why are they
amazingly
homeless?
poor assassins, not very good at their
They're
job.
just not good at it, I guess.
Yeah.
I think that's their cover. That's how they blend in and become invisible. Like they got tons of money, but they spend it all on pigeons.
I also like that idea as well. I like the idea of I'm the richest assassin in the world, but I'm also doubling as a homeless man because that makes it easier for me to kill folk.
I can't wait till I'm done with this so I can get in my rocket car.
And of course, one big difference between John Wick and this movie is not only the director, but then Miller, I don't know, was he an assistant director or whatever? They had two super talented action directors on that movie, and this had one guy who is neither of those two.
Yeah, I mean, they were it's two stunt men that were directing John Wick with the first one and everything, and they knew what they were doing. And this is obviously not a guy who's he did a small Swedish film and some music videos, and that's been about it. And
Did the Lords of Chaos.
Yeah, Lords of Chaos. I mean, like I said, that's his biggest profile thing, and people that saw it really enjoyed it. I know a lot of my friends that are into kind of genre stuff have seen it and enjoyed it, but not yet for me, not yet. But before we get to our final review here and everything, we do have to ask ourselves one very important question, and it is how in the world this movie relates back one-to-one with the most magnanimous man in Hollywood, Sylvester Stallone.
Why, thank you, Adam. I have a prepared statement. Brittany Amos is the visual effects coordinator on Polar, which is a big deal because she's only been in the business for 3 years. So what, some of you may ask? She's the boss on a direct-to-Netflix movie that doesn't have many visual effects. Who cares? Well, let me tell you who cares. I do. Brittany Amos has done something that not too many people do this early in their career. She gets to wear the boss pants. And she says to the other people in the department things like, I need you to visual effects things better. And they respond, right away, boss. Maybe she says something like, I've been around a few visually affecting people in my time, but you folks are the most visually effective people I have ever been around. Because Brittany Amos is a motivator and a team captain, and she remembers her coworkers' birthdays. She's even nice to Gene, even though other people in the visual effects department think Gene is slow and an anchor around the entire department's neck. Brittany thinks there's something about him that the other people in the department can't see, so she's nice to him and takes him under her wing, which Gene misinterprets as romantic love. And on a random Wednesday night, the crew decides to go to a karaoke bar and take the edge off of their highly demanding jobs. Gene's never been too great around women, but with Brittany, he's more at ease than with other women. And so after Brittany Amos takes the roof off the karaoke bar with her barn-burning version of Gwen Stefani's Let Me Blow Your Mind, Gene decides to make his move. And because Gene is an emotionally stunted American nerd, he decides the best way to tell her how he feels is by quoting a line from his favorite movie, Team America World Police. And it starts with the line, see, there's 3 types of people in this world. But I can't say the rest because it's a family podcast with family values and family and the Bible. Anyway, it didn't go well. And now Gene is an outspoken pro-chunk nut job on Twitter. Brittany Amos also worked on Creed 2 in the visual effects department. And Creed 2 starred and was written by a man who's never listened to a podcast, or as people his age like to call it, fake radio, Sylvester Stallone. No word on Gene, but rumors are he's starting a show with a failed comedian and a former entertainment journalist to start a, quote, funny, unquote, conservative talking head show called News Clues. And there you have it, HMPers. This week's Stallone connection is Brittany Amos. She's a woman who has the world on a string, sitting on a rainbow. I'm Sean Kovacs. You are welcome.
Oh, have you seen some of these videos that Stallone is putting out? Oh my gosh, he's having these football parties. He's got like Jay Glazer and Al Pacino, Guy Fieri's in his kitchen cooking. It's just like it is. He's got like 8 billion people. Like every one of these people is over at his house, and he's just entertaining and all kinds of crap. It's hilarious. It's fantastic. Stallone, he just all right. He needs to know about this show. Just tweet Sylvester Stallone until he knows about the show. For heaven's sake, please.
He's never gonna know about the show.
No.
Man. He's not even on his own.
Listen, I'll tell you this much: we can shoot for Frank Stallone.
Yeah, that's.
I think we can get Frank Stallone if we really try. So,
man, you don't settle for Frank Stallone, guys. You don't settle.
He does enough of a Sly impression that I think it could pass well enough.
He was great in Barfly.
So let's get down to it here at Hero Movie Podcast. We have our own Robin rating system. If you'd like to check that out, head on down to facebook.com/Hero Movie Podcast. It's right there at the top of the screen. And while you're there, throw a like on a page, why don't you? Bruce, where does Polar on Netflix fall on the Robin rating system for you?
Like I said before, it's like John Wick with Mads Mikkelsen with a dash of Leon, the professional, thrown in. Even though it's more an implied Leon, we don't get the direct stuff there. But I liked it good enough. It didn't bore me. And, following up last week's coverage of The Saint, I'm just happy to see something that didn't bore me. And I usually give a Damian Wayne, like in two situations. Either I didn't like the movie, but I can see where other people would, or I did like the movie, but I could see where other people wouldn't, so like a split decision. This is one of those where I like the movie good enough. But I could totally understand why maybe other people like you wouldn't, Adam. So I'm going to give it the middle of the road Damian Wayne.
Cool. Sean, what do you think?
Oh, I'm the exact same spot. I'm Damian Wayne. It's a low end. Expect nothing. If you're like, hey, I just want to watch a movie that's dumb and people kill people and sometimes it's clever and sometimes they're pretty, this is the movie for you. The other part to this movie that we never even touched on is that the director should throw a couple of shekels Guy Ritchie's way. Lot of Guy Ritchie-ness to this movie without it being Guy Ritchie.
Yeah, a little bit of that. This is a Jason Todd for me. I hated this thing. I wish I liked it. There's enough cool action scenes that I would go back and watch those scenes specifically again, but nothing more. The story is just terrible. Like I said, I've ranted enough about how I dislike this movie, but I have no taste for it. No Polar 2, please. No, thank you. I don't want to. I'm good. No thanks. But we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to watch next week. Hopefully we'll have some better options on the table and everything. But before we talk about what that is, Bruce, where might we find more of your work on the internet?
First off, just want to say happy birthday to Dave Bautista, Drax, one of the best turd joke makers in the business. But yeah, you can check me out on Chubby Wizard. We're going to give our Chubbies here soon, the annual comic book awards that we let the fans vote on.
What's that trophy look like?
It's just whatever I got left over from those participation trophies when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
It's macrame.
Yeah, Chubby Wizard.
Let's check out Chubby Wizard. Sean, you have the most amazing Twitter I've heard. This is what I've heard. That's the rumors going around. Is that true?
Sweet Seansy from the internet, ! At Sean Kovacs 4. However, I would like to concede my time to bring up something that we never talked about on the show, which is that, Bruce, what say you about No Watchmen Season 2?
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of expected, right? Isn't that sort of what we were set up for? So, yeah, I wanted a season 2, and they're not going to give it to me, but I didn't want a season 1, and they did, so it all works out.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, everything works out for the best sometimes. So yeah, check that out if you haven't and you've watched Watchmen and you haven't listened to the Redford Administration. Go check that out. Or if you like The Mandalorian on the Disney Plus, check out Mandalorian 30 Questions, available wherever you find finer podcasts. So next week we are, you can be like our good friend. What was his new nickname again? I totally forgot.
Cincinnati Slingshot.
New Slingshot was in there. Cincinnati Slingshot. You can be just like him and everybody else and get to vote on what we watch every single month over at patreon.com/HMP. And that's for any level. Even if you're at the dollar level, you get to help shape this show and put it in whatever direction that you want. Here are the nominees up for the Patreon vote this month. So next week we will either cover Alien versus Predator, Two Guns, Return of Swamp Thing, or 1010. Quite the varied selection there for you. So that will go up probably on Tuesday for your vote. And vote quickly, and we'll cover whatever you guys tell us to cover because you help this show happen. Patreon.com/HMP. That is it, everybody. Join us next week for your Patreon selections. For Bruce, Leslie, and Sweet Shawnzy from the internet, my name's Adam Portrais. Stay super, everybody.
Bye, Marty and Evie.